Now that Assassin's Creed Shadows has been out for a while, it's finally time. I'm ranking every mainline Assassin's Creed game from the absolute worst to the very best based entirely on my own experience. Just to be clear, I won't go over the handheld games VR or the smaller titles. Now, you might disagree with my list and that's totally fine, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, but without further ado, let's start with the worst game in the series, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. In my opinion, this is where the series' real downgrade became the most obvious. Generally speaking, it's a decent game, but I still consider it the worst Assassin's Creed experience ever. Some say it shouldn't even be called an AC game, but I disagree. Odyssey has plenty of Isu lore and introduces Cassandra, a character I genuinely liked who went on to become pivotal to the series lore thanks to her staff and her role in Layla's journey. But everything else, oh my god. The gameplay is mostly built on top of Origins, which should technically be an amazing thing, at least for me. But unfortunately, Odyssey suffered from bizarre design choices that really hurt the experience, unlike what I experienced in its predecessor. It's overloaded with RPG grind and filler content that I just couldn't care about simply due to their poor writing. The sailing parts, while not as crucial as in Black Flag, were my least interesting segments of the entire gameplay as well. But the real problem was the level gating, which ultimately frustrated me immensely. Every time a main quest appeared in your log, you were forced to complete multiple unrelated side quests just to level up enough to continue. This completely wrecked the pacing and made Odyssey feel closer to an MMORPG, a genre that I'm clearly not into. On top of that, the game almost entirely ignores the conflict between the Assassin versus Templars due to its time period. It introduces lore retcons and never delivers the same mind-blowing moments, especially in Isu related stuff, as earlier titles. Add to that the low quality animations, weak writing, and one of the worst parkour experiences in the series to date, and you've got a game that felt more like an adventure that is ashamed of being called an Assassin's Creed and forced itself every now and then to barely give me what I really want from an AC title. Sadly, as most of you know, Syndicate is a victim of Unity's failure. This game could have been so much better. During development, the devs explored different directions that never fully materialized, and what we got instead was an odd compromised title. Sure, it was polished, but it clearly pulled back on a lot. The city was designed more for zipping around with the rope launcher than parkour, and more importantly, the story was a mess. Two inexperienced assassins walk into one of the most important Templar strongholds in the world and just casually take down the entire order? I get what they were going for, the whole surprise attack where they least expected it angle, but it just didn't work. Also, the dual protagonist approach was an odd choice since they played almost similarly. The writing was weak and the characters were bland, especially Jacob being the immature character that his arc in the main story ends right before he finally grows up a bit. Both the main story and modern day dialogue were awkward and cringy, and the overall tone, with its forced humor and safe, stripped down gameplay, made the whole thing feel uninteresting. That said, it did have a few bright spots. The World War I rift was a great surprise, the aesthetics and the city design were absolutely beautiful, the black box missions were fun, and the Isu lore it introduced had real potential even if it was never continued in the games. Still, those strengths weren't enough. Syndicate played it too safe and ended up being a shallow experience that didn't capture what makes Assassin's Creed great for me. It lacked memorable moments, intriguing characters, and streamlined most of the interesting gameplay systems. Now here's where things get interesting. For a game set in Japan, perhaps the most requested setting in the entire series, I had high expectations for Shadows. I expected refined parkour, smoother animations, worthy of a current gen title of course, a deeper dive into Basim's modern day arc, and most of all a return to the core Assassin vs Templar conflict given the time period. But it didn't deliver any of that. The modern day storyline is vague and hidden behind a battle pass. Seriously? Lock-in narrative content behind a battle pass? That's just terrible. And the saddest part is that not enough people are talking about it. That alone says a lot about how far modern day content has fallen, once a central part of Assassin's Creed, now almost forgotten. But to be fair, Shadows isn't all bad. The world is stunning. It's one of the most beautiful in the series, even if it feels a bit emptier than past games. Stealth is the best it's ever been. Finally, after years of waiting, Assassin's Creed actually pushed stealth forward. Combat too saw a major improvement. Fights are more engaging and sometimes even genuinely challenging, which I didn't expect. But despite this upgrade, the weapon variety took a step back. I get why they limited it. It was a design choice to make each protagonist play differently, but I still didn't like it. Speaking of which, the dual protagonist approach from a gameplay point of view felt shallow and unnecessary to me. And then there's the story. Not the writing though, that's been significantly improved compared to Syndicate and Odyssey, but the structure, that's where Shadows falls flat. The core theme of the story and the main bits are well made, but everything that comes between fails to attract my attention. The main story remains unfinished and is continued in a paid expansion. Not expanded, but continued. And that's just frustrating. post-launch content should add to the story, not complete it. I really wanted to rank Shadows higher. It has incredible strengths, but the missed opportunities and some truly questionable decisions held it back. But when it comes to Rogue, I've always felt that if it had a bigger budget, wasn't developed solely for 7th generation consoles just to squeeze out one last drop from that player base, and most importantly had more development time, it could have started the trend of playing as a Templar in more interesting ways. Because honestly, it's one of the aspects in the series that I always wanted to explore properly. But the problem is, Rogue's gameplay didn't really innovate much. It felt like you were playing as an assassin just wearing a Templar's coat. And well, the gameplay was almost entirely based on AC4. Sure, there were some minor differences, but not nearly enough. The game felt incredibly short and the parkour felt unpolished at times. This same issue with innovation bleeds into the story as well. Up to this point, Assassin's Creed had portrayed the Templars as the villains and the assassins as the good guys, but Rogue flips that perspective just for this one game, and suddenly the assassins are painted as the bad guys while the Templars get the moral high ground. The game tries to justify it, and Shay as a character does help ground the shift, but it still comes off as a shallow take on the larger ideological conflict. The characters just aren't that memorable compared to the rest of the series, and the modern day segments are just as boring as Black Flags, which was a major disappointment. But even with all that, Rogue has some genuinely cool connections to AC3 and Unity, and playing as a Templar despite the flawed execution was still a concept I appreciated. After years of major gameplay shifts, RPG mechanics, and playing as characters who weren't even assassins, Mirage finally tried to bring Assassin's Creed back to its roots. It gave us Baghdad, easily one of the best cities we've had in the series in years. The level design was excellent, parkour felt smoother than it had in a long time, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we got a proper stealth-focused experience. Mirage expanded on Basim's story, a fan-favorite character from Valhalla and a hidden one, and it also brought back a lot of the familiar gameplay elements. But despite all that, it still didn't hit as hard as it needed to. There were no modern-day story segments, combat was heavily watered down. The enemy AI felt weak, the campaign was short, and it completely skipped the opportunity to bridge the gap between Mirage and Valhalla. The result was a game that felt stripped down. Mirage had a cast of characters full of potential, but most were barely developed, treated like filler NPCs rather than important figures. Also, when something happened to them, it barely mattered because the game really didn't try to establish a connection between them and me as a player. By the way, the lack of weapon variety in the name of forcing stealth felt like a weak design choice. And once again, the limited budget and rushed development meant a lot of great ideas never made it past the concept phase. In the end, we got a simpler game than expected, one that showed a lot of promise but didn't fully deliver. Some people claim that Unity is the root of all the future changes in Assassin's Creed. Well, I agree to some extent. Yes, Unity's messy launch changed a lot of Ubisoft's plans, but it's not the origin of everything that followed later, since we already had another game called Black Flag that tried changing the formula a bit, and for better or worse, it turned out to be really successful too. But we'll get to that in a bit. I really wanted to rank Unity higher, but the problem with this game is that even years later, it still suffers from major technical issues. Like many games in the series, it had a rough development, had lots of cut content, and ended up as a buggy mess on 8th gen consoles. Gameplay wise, Unity didn't change that much from the older games. It trimmed down some of the more annoying elements, but it also made some weird decisions like completely removing playable modern day segments and replacing them with bland cutscenes. Also, Arno's story was one of the most forgettable in the entire franchise. He felt like a discount Ezio, and it was obvious Ubisoft was trying hard to recreate Ezio's charm but ultimately failed. The love story between Arno and Elise was shallow and predictable. The Brotherhood felt dumped down to an almost laughable degree, and everything in the narrative felt like it was setting up a bigger story that never came. Then there's the co-op. The idea was genuinely great, but the execution, oh my god, it was horrible. I had such a terrible time during the first month of launch in the co-op that I still remember even the most basic interactions breaking constantly. And now, while you can find some players still playing it, it's almost a ghost town, and honestly that's understandable given the zero support this mode received over the years. As for the parkour, yes, it looks gorgeous, but let's be honest, it plays like a mess. It's unresponsive, clunky, and full of bugs. I don't think mastering all the bugs suddenly makes Unity's parkour great. It's still broken. The system constantly throws in random mistakes even if you do everything right. Despite that, the introduction of black box missions was really solid as they added more depth to stealth, and the combat was a tiny bit harder compared to the previous titles, but still nothing too serious. There were also some RPG elements that I liked, but I wish they had more thoughtful integration. However, what I believe to be one of the best things about Unity is its helix rifts. They really felt unique, the exact type of thing I expect from an AC game, something that you're not expecting to see, and honestly I'm so glad they expanded upon them in Syndicate, but unfortunately they were never continued in later games. On one hand, it's one of the earliest titles to receive the classic "this isn't a real Assassin's Creed game" criticism, and honestly I get why some people said that. But on the other hand, it's a genuinely fun game that in many ways did things better than some of the entries I've ranked so far. So this was the first time that AC started its departure from the classic titles, way before Origins. However, it still had proper cities you could parkour through, the parkour system was solid, the Assassin vs Templar conflict was present, and it looked and played like an Assassin's Creed game. But I just couldn't connect with the naval stuff. Sailing was the core mechanic in this game, and while many fans loved it, I simply didn't enjoy it. I didn't like it in AC3, and I certainly didn't like it here, though to be fair in AC3 it wasn't the main focus. Despite that, at times the assassin plot felt like a background theme. Edward didn't really become an assassin until the very end of the game, and some of the more interesting story stuff happened in the books. And while the story and the character writings were genuinely interesting, the modern day section felt like a disaster. I respect that they tried something new with it, but the gameplay was just horrendous, especially after the banger modern day segments in AC3. Also, the combat system in the core gameplay felt way too easy overall, perhaps even easier than its predecessors. But even with all that said, there's a lot to love here. The exploration was fantastic, the world felt alive with adventure, the characters were memorable, the stealth and parkour was satisfying, and despite my issues with the sailing, I'll admit, the ship combat was actually great. In fact, it was way better than Odyssey's. Given that you're playing as a pirate, it made sense for that game to lean into that theme, and it pulled it off pretty well. I love the world, the villains, the diving segments, and the overall atmosphere, but this was the first time where Assassin's Creed really started to lose focus on some of its core themes, and that shift genuinely turned me off. Yes, I liked Origins more than Black Flag. Bayek's story was far more captivating, ancient Egypt had always fascinated me growing up, and exploring that world in Origins felt like a dream come true. Unlike many longtime fans, I actually welcomed the RPG shift. It felt fresh. The combat finally moved away from the counter-kill spam of earlier titles and introduced a system that was more skill-based. And Abu Bakr Salim's performance as Bayek absolutely carried the game. I love the smaller details too. The minigames that explored Bayek's grief and his relation with his son, the hippodrome races, the layout of the outposts and fortresses, it all felt exciting and well designed at the time. The gameplay loop, especially during my first run, was one of my favorites in the series, but that doesn't mean Origins was perfect. Stealth took a noticeable step back. Social stealth was completely gone. The hidden blade often failed to kill enemies unless you heavily upgraded it. Level gating existed, though thankfully not as aggressively as in Odyssey, and the parkour saw a noticeable downgrade. The story also felt oddly paced. The concept of the hidden ones, the foundation of the Assassin Brotherhood, only comes together near the end, much like Edward's assassin arc in Black Flag, and while Bayek's personal journey was powerful, the main narrative was fairly short. The illusion of a long story was mostly propped up by the side content you had to complete to keep up with the level curve. The padding didn't bother me much during my first run, but a New Game Plus playthrough makes it painfully obvious. More importantly, the Isu parts felt like an afterthought, as Bayek didn't react to anything even in the core story moments, and sometimes things felt stitched together at the last minute. Overall, Origins was the start of a new era. Not flawless by any means, but it got enough right to leave a lasting impression, and for me, it edged out Black Flag. The final chapter in Ezio's trilogy didn't hit as hard for me as its predecessors, but that's not to say I didn't enjoy it. Constantinople was visually striking. Seeing an older Ezio was odd at first, but it quickly became one of the game's most meaningful aspects. The addition of Yusuf and the hook blade was fantastic. Parkour felt better than ever by becoming faster, more fluid, and fun to pull off. But for every step forward, Revelations had one or two stumbles. The anime segments were incredibly barebones. The tower defense minigame was clunky, frustrating, and completely out of place. Combat still lacked challenge. The AI wasn't much smarter, and most gameplay improvements were minimal. I also appreciated the Altair flashback sequences, as they added more emotional depth and brought the story full circle with some of the most memorable scenes in the entire franchise. But changing Altair's voice actor hurt the character's presence. He just didn't feel like the same person anymore, which is a shame, unfortunately. Overall, Revelations was a solid Assassin's Creed game, but I experienced better games in the series, and it didn't offer lots of meaningful gameplay changes as a sequel either. The original Assassin's Creed is one of the most influential games of my life. Talking about it always brings a smile to my face, but the moment you replay it, the game's age slaps you hard in that very same face. Altair can't swim, combat is painfully basic, you can't skip dialogue, replaying a specific mission just to free roam or collect things is painfully jarring since you have to sit through long cutscenes, and the gameplay is incredibly simple. While I do believe that simplicity can be elegant and sometimes less is more, that's clearly not the case here. Progression is completely linear. You are drip-fed abilities at set points in the story instead of earning them through your actions. The parkour system, often praised by fans of the original, felt slow and clunky to me. Sure, you can pull off some cool tricks and the cities are very fun to explore, but I wouldn't call this the best parkour in the series. The modern day segments were a drag. As the first attempt at building that side of the narrative, they were incredibly slow and broke the pacing badly. I constantly found myself wanting to explore them more, but as I figured out there's not much to them, I just wanted to skip them faster so I could get back into the animus. Still, this game was the beginning of it all. It laid the foundation, and despite all its flaws, it's a title I'll always have respect for. Assassin's Creed 3 was one of the best experiences I've had in the series, and if it weren't for the legacy of stronger entries before and after it, I'd have ranked it even higher. The modern day story finally felt substantial with a nice gameplay that offered a refreshing shift, and the overarching plot kept me hooked the entire way through. Visually, the leap was undeniable. The animations looked smoother, the environments felt alive, and new gameplay tools breathed fresh air into the formula without losing that signature AC identity. But while I loved a lot about AC3, there were just as many things that didn't land. The cities for one never resonated with me. New York and Boston lacked the soul and personality of places like Florence or Venice. They didn't feel memorable despite looking really detailed. Stealth remained mostly unchanged, and while combat got flashier and more cinematic, it still lacked challenge and depth. And some of the new features like certain tools or mechanics were introduced with flair but barely found a purpose later on. The pacing of the story was uneven in places. I appreciated Connor as a character. He was a bold shift from Ezio. He was more serious and even naive at times, but he was interesting nonetheless. However, the villains didn't measure up, mostly because AC2 did villains a lot better. AC3 was ambitious, bold, and sometimes messy, but it tried a lot of new things, and I still remember it fondly for them. Brotherhood holds a very special place in my heart. Rome is another favorite location of mine, and Ubisoft did a phenomenal job capturing its scale, energy, and beauty. The game picks up right after the dramatic ending of AC2, and from the first moment it delivers. We got to see a more mature Ezio, now stepping into the role of a mentor, guiding others while continuing his own mission. The introduction of assassin recruits added a new layer to the gameplay and made the Brotherhood feel more alive than ever. The villains were iconic, and the supporting cast was just as strong, giving the story both momentum and emotion. Toward the end, the pacing got a bit rushed, but the ride up to that point made it easy to forgive. Gameplay-wise, Brotherhood expanded on what worked in AC2. It didn't reinvent the wheel, but at this specific point it really didn't have to. That said, I missed the feeling of traveling through different cities. Rome was amazing, but I've always loved when AC games let you explore multiple cities. Even so, the world was a parkour paradise filled with rooftops, alleyways, and opportunities to keep moving without ever touching the ground. The modern day story took a big step forward here too, especially with its mind-blowing ending. The challenge-based armor unlocks felt earned, unlike the handouts we see in later games, and renovating the city gave the gameplay a satisfying loop. Linear missions like Da Vinci's early tank prototype or the timed challenges added welcome variety. I love Brotherhood so much. It took the best parts of AC2 and shaped them into something unforgettable. But there are just a couple of games that slightly edge it for me. And one of them is AC Valhalla. I know, seeing this game here might surprise some of you, but I absolutely loved it. From beginning to end, Eivor's story felt like a true journey. The writing, characters, and the narrative stood out as some of the best in the series. I found the world incredibly immersive, whether it was leading raids, discovering stories across multiple maps, or just soaking in the game's breathtaking visuals. Everything felt great. Even compared to newer entries like Shadows, Valhalla still holds its ground as one of the most stunning AC games ever made. It offers the best exploration in the series, and the combat is just brilliant. Dual-wielding any combination of weapons felt powerful and flexible. Add in fun minigames and the godlike music and you've got a game that constantly offers an impressive experience. The loot system was a huge improvement over previous RPG entries since it felt more earned and curated. And then there's the modern day story. Just wow! This was the best it's been since AC3. The introduction of Basim into the present day, the Reader, the Isu lore, and the way it connected to some other games in the series were all phenomenal. I genuinely think Valhalla did more for the Isu lore than all past entries combined. It respected the lore, expanded its meaning, and left me wanting more. Sadly, later games walked away from this, which still baffles me, but the game wasn't without flaws. Animations often felt stiff and occasionally broke immersion. The stealth saw improvements, especially with some returning mechanics like social stealth, but the AI remained inconsistent. And the parkour was another weak point. While the game introduced light platforming challenges, it never quite delivered the kind of environments that made parkour feel rewarding or essential. People often criticize Valhalla for its length, but I personally didn't mind. Unlike Odyssey, most of its content felt narratively relevant and purposeful. I just wish they added a new Game Plus mode to the game. For everything it got right, especially the lore, the music, and the unforgettable journey, Valhalla earns its spot near the top for me. And here it is. The number 1 spot, the ultimate Assassin's Creed experience, Assassin's Creed 2. This game didn't just improve on the original, it redefined the entire series. It introduced me to a cast of unforgettable characters, an emotionally rich story, and a world that still sticks with me to this day. From its tragic moment to its burst of lighthearted charm, this was a game full of life and emotion. Ezio's story is hands down my favorite in the franchise. Following his life from his birth to his adulthood, turning from a reckless kid to a mature assassin was incredible. His character development was perfectly paced, and Roger Craig Smith delivers such a powerful performance that no other protagonist in the franchise has topped it for me. Following Ezio felt like living a full life alongside him. The atmosphere in AC2 is unmatched. Whether you're walking through Florence, Venice, or Forlì, there's a mood, a vibe, a beauty to the architecture and world design that's hard to describe. And the music is just iconic. The Florence theme playing under this video is one of my all-time favorite game tracks, and AC2 is just filled with this type of great music thanks to its brilliant composer. From a gameplay standpoint, AC2 was masterfully crafted. It introduced new mechanics and challenges gradually, keeping things fresh from start to finish. The parkour felt fluid and satisfying, the cities were richly detailed and diverse, and side content like the hidden tombs rewarded you with the best armor only after completing all the challenges. The modern-day story also found its footing here. It gave us compelling characters like Rebecca and Sean, and while the gameplay there was limited, it still added a strong layer to the overall narrative. Assassin's Creed 2 is the one game that for me got almost everything right. It's nostalgic, yes, but beyond nostalgia, it's just masterfully made. It's a game that made me fall in love with Assassin's Creed properly, and nothing since has matched it. Even though some Assassin's Creed games didn't really click for me, I still love this franchise through its highs and lows. It's a series I grew up with and one I'll always care about deeply. But now I want to hear from you. What are your favorite Assassin's Creed games and how would you rank the series? Let me know in the comments.